what the heck is going on with D&D this week? Or maybe better yet, what the heck is going on with D&D for the past year and a half? There's a lot of people taking what is going on this week to heart. When we play D&D, it feels like our game. And a lot of it comes down to this text right here, where it says, above all else, D&D is yours. The friendships you make around the table will be unique to you. The adventures you embark on, the characters you create, the memories you make, these will all be yours. Even in the official materials, right? Wizards is always telling you, like, this is yours. Make it what you want. And when Wizards makes big decisions that affect us, it feels like someone's attacking us personally, even though they're probably just trying to run a business. We're going to go back to February of last year. Right? And I'm sure this extends far past that. What this CNBC calls Hasbro activists, which was really just a hedge fund called Alta Capital Management, wrote this letter talking to Hasbro about how they should separate Wizards of the Coast into its separate company so that they could each increase in value. Right here it says, AltaFox views WOTC resources spent on developing video games or trading games for non-WotC Hasbro IP as a colossal failure of capital allocation and a waste of WotC talent and time considering the incredible reinvestment opportunities WotC has within its core brands. And what AltaFox was saying is, by taking WotC resources to make G.I. Joe like card games and things, you're wasting a huge amount of potential. This wasn't a fan talking about the properties. This was a hedge fund being like, you're making less money than you should be. Our stocks aren't valued what they should be at. This must have been something happening way before they wrote this letter. In 2022 alone, we got the new gift set rules, so the expanded rules, kind of minor edits. We got Call of the Netherdeep, the Critical Role book. We got Monsters of the Multiverse. We got D&D's Journey Through the Radiant Citadel. We got Spelljammer, which was a 3-book series, and we got the Dragonlance, which also came with like a side game. We got like more D&D stuff that we've seen in like multiple years in the past. I have to assume people at Hasbro were thinking the same thing of like, how can we make more money? And the answer here was, how many books can we really sell to somebody every year? And it's probably not as many as something like a digital subscription. So amongst all of this, we've seen Wizards of the Coast make more money than ever last year. It has consistently been getting more and more and more money, but Hasbro's overall value has been dropping. And Hasbro's going to take these techniques of trying to figure out how to make digital earnings through WotC, right? The focus is going to change to like our most profitable IPs are now in Wizards of the Coast, which is how you get to them spending $146 million on buying DnDBeyond. Right? Through all these hardships back in April, they dropped a huge amount of money. And when we look at that $146 million figure, that's actually only a fraction of it. Wizards of the Coast hired a whole bunch of software engineers and creative team to start building out this virtual tabletop. For the first time in like recent history, we're seeing D&D take aim at its competitors who are using D&D and raising D&D up, right? So like we have things like Roll20 or Foundry who support D&D as virtual tabletops, and Wizards is out like taking their guns and pointing them at the people who have like helped build Wizards into this digital age, which feels very strange. The other thing we're getting is that these D&D Beyond wouldn't only be maybe funded by the DM. As a player, and you've played D&D with me, you've never had to go out and buy a book. I've got shelves of books behind me, right? So what they say is they're only targeting 20% of D&D players for financial income, right? Like only, and what their math is 1 player or 4 players, 1 DM. Only the DM is spending money. But on a virtual tabletop like this, we can get everyone to pay a little bit.
There's nothing wrong with a company seeking to add additional value to players. So if they are developing something that adds value, adds ease, like makes it more natural so people can focus on the story, on the experience, then that's a very positive thing, and I'm not going to be upset at a company for trying to do that.
No, and I think that's what we were kind of talking about in the beginning, was a lot of people see this change as like a personal attack of, what, you're not happy with how much money we've given you? And just in America, in the world we live in, yes, Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro are going to try to make more money, and they're going to try to build bigger products that everyone wants. But clips like this that leaked out early December kind of make things feel a little bit worse. And what's hard to hear is all of a sudden Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast is now speaking about us players not as a community, but as a dollar sign. And what's interesting is like, even when we were hearing about all of this information, a lot of us were like, even if we don't want to do what Wizards is making, we can still play D&D through these companies like Cobalt Press and all these other companies who are making great materials. And that comes down to some legal jargon that I'm not very good at. There was a game company in China called Yoka Games, and they made a game that was almost identical to Bang, but called it Legend of the Three Kings. And in copyright law, they were able to make this game legally. And that's because you're not allowed to copyright game rules. So if you want to go make a Scrabble rep-off, you could write your own rules that is exactly Scrabble. You can make your own box art and then just sell it, right? You can't use the Scrabble name because that's an intellectual property, but the rules of spelling with tiles can't be copywritten. And what's hard with specifically RPGs and tabletop RPGs is where is that line of rules and art? Because story and character names and spell names, that's all considered published art. So where does that break down? It's very confusing. I'm like, well, what of 5e is free for everyone to use and what isn't? And the answer to that was this open game license that was produced in 2000. It's changed a little bit since then, but at its core, what this said was you are legally allowed to make content for 5e without any legal worry. And it's just really cool because it allows companies like Free League Publishing to make this amazing game. Hasbro probably sees Free League Publishing as a competitor, as if this Lord of the Rings role-playing book is taking money directly out of the pocket of Wizards of the Coast.
Totally.
I think because we've watched D&D only get bigger and bigger and bigger, any sane person who like lives in this community knows that content like this is actually helping D&D to grow. But if you don't play the games and you're just kind of a money person from Hasbro, then on optics, right, this looks bad. Let's say Hasbro thinks this, and all of a sudden they're like, all right, that OGL is going to be a big problem for us down the road. We're making new D&D, and we really want that new D&D to live only on DnDBeyond. So the creators of that original OGL, which if I'm going to go back to this video, I recommend everyone go and watch this. It's long, it's over 2 hours, but Ryan Dancey helped write that original OGL. He talks about how they planned for it to be kind of persistent forever. So this is where all of a sudden last week, like everything hit the fan. Again, this was leaked. So 1.1 this was not finalized. This document, what they're calling OGL1.1, they're splitting it up into two different sections. They're the OGL 1.1 for non-commercial and the OGL 1.1 for commercial. And if you're like, okay, maybe some company like Cobalt Press who makes tons and tons of money off this, maybe they're commercial, but that won't affect us. So to be clear, crowdfunding a new project is commercial use. Accepting subscriptions or membership fees for Patreon patrons is commercial use, which means that when we make our Twitch money, which unlocks things in like our Discord, or when I had a Patreon for Dungeons and Designers and I was releasing content like this, like a background you could use D&D, all of a sudden I would be required to give Wizards 25% of my Patreon income.
This is only for people that were making above $750,000, and you don't pay it on the full $750,000. You pay it on the money that you make above the $750,000. But there's another piece about being able to revoke your access at any point.
There was revoke, I believe, in there. There was that D&D owns your property if you make it. So then that became questions of, do they own Lord of the Rings then? Like if this is released under 1.1 and they own this book, do they also own Lord of the Rings? Which is no, you're not allowed to trade trademarks like that.
Or does it give them the right to then go publish something else off the backs of someone else's property and things like that? Yeah.
All of a sudden, what became a very like open and like community-based document, even though legally upholding, right? Like this was a legal document, you can use it in court. This just became all of a sudden like not helping the creator at all 100% helping Wizards. If I didn't feel like D&D was mine, this just feels like another business move. But because of this tradition over the last like 20 years, D&D has become the users. So we get this reaction, then we get this. So for like 2 days, people have been losing their minds. And it says, we'll be sharing more soon. Thank you for your patience. What that turned into was them canceling their live streams on Twitch and not saying anything. Got like really weird. All of a sudden we're like,
I hate that.
And like if you scroll through this, like all of a sudden, right, first thing you see, one of the first things you see is like that big red image, and people being like, every hour you don't say something is bad for you. Then we get this leaked message or email from a WotC employer, a supposed WotC employer, right? So all of a sudden we get this document saying, hey, if you want to have D&D hear you, cancel your D&D subscription. All of a sudden, my feed is filled with these images, which is the subscription cancellation screen from DnDBeyond. Wild how like the community like gets something and then just reacts, gets something, and like they're letting Wizards know like this isn't just like a fun hobby for us.
For us to play D&D, we have a load of free time, and we're gonna use that to make this as problematic for you as possible.
Then it explodes even more because people then start posting this, that when they're trying to cancel their subscriptions, it's 500 erroring out, so they can't cancel their subscriptions. And then people are like, DnDBeyond is like not letting us cancel, when really it was probably just an influx of people on their website and it probably just crashed.
In fairness, MoviePass kind of set the precedent when they disabled the ability for people to cancel accounts. And so unfortunately, as consumers,
we don't know.
We have a history of seeing companies do things like this.
A few days later, we get this official announcement. This was this morning. Yeah. And really, it doesn't feel good. It says, when we initially conceived of revising the OGL, it was with 3 major goals in mind. First, we wanted the ability to prevent the use of D&D content from being included in hateful and discriminatory products. Second, we wanted to address those attempting to use D&D in Web3, blockchain games, and NFTs. And third, we wanted to ensure that the OGL is for the content creator, the homebrew, the aspiring designer, our players, and the community, not major corporations to use for their own commercial and promotional purposes. But for someone on Kickstarter, like one of these creators that is doing a book, who makes over $1 million, after Kickstarter's fee, after all of the manufacturing costs, the average overhead is around 10 to 15% because books are expensive to make and people don't pay a lot for them. So that 20% hit on top of that would mean all of your successful $1 million campaigns that's making tons and tons of books for fans couldn't exist. So what they do say is that the 1.1 isn't going to come out. It is going to come out though. Like something is going to come out.
Sure.
I have no reason to think that what we just read will change much. Out of all the things we just shared about OGL, this is the one thing that is actually official. But before this came out, like the damage was done. And I think there's a little bit of a silver lining to this cloud. Cobalt Press announced, and Cobalt Press, for those who don't know, is arguably the biggest third-party creator for D&D. They announced Project Black Flag. That's going to be their own subscription-free setting under an OpenGL. Like they're going for the guts, right? Like they're slashing at Wizards. I trust Cobalt almost more than I do Wizards, right? Like Cobalt really just continuously makes really good products, and they're owned by like a player owner, right? Like the CEO is a player. So it's just like really cool. And then my personal favorite creator is Matt Colville. And he announced that they've been working on some ideas for their own rule book. So all of a sudden we have like 2 really big hitters. Even though Wizards is in a weird spot right now, the community is being heard, even if not by Hasbro. But I think the big changing moment was this Free the Wizards. Because all of a sudden, Wizards of the Coast has always felt like a company run by nerds. Now that Hasbro can't ignore it, Wizards of the Coast is run by a Fortune 500 company. We have to get used to the idea that we're no longer supporting some guy in his basement, right? I mean, we haven't been for a very, very long time. But it felt like that, and now it doesn't. Now it feels like we're supporting Hasbro. And creators like Cobalt Press and creators like Matt Colville are going to come in and be like, if you want to support people who are in the industry who like love this realm, you don't have to support Hasbro.
I don't have an issue with a company monetizing its product. And again, especially if the company is adding increased value or making investments in order to add increased value. I think what makes all of this stink is this idea of all things being the same, we're just giving nothing new to someone like Critical Role, we're just going to come and demand profits off of you.
But as someone who really likes content like this, that could start going away because 5e is going to start taking whatever little money they were making from this, that's where things start getting a little harder to accept. Like, I love how this changes 5e and makes 5e feel new to me again. And if all of a sudden Wizards is the only one involved, then I'm stuck with this, which you know I talked about. And I just do not care about big purple people with hamsters on their shoulder.